Hello, everybody, and welcome. It is Wednesday, and it's after spring break, and we're back for yet another Mentor Core live discussion. Glad to have you joining us today. Unfortunately, Lisa Beth was unable to join. What do they say in the industry? She's on assignment, so she's on assignment today, and won't be able to attend. But we'll carry on without her. She's fueled me with some questions to make sure we ask. So we will continue with her in spirit. But welcome, I'm so excited to welcome Carrie Child. Carrie is a principal consultant at Contoural, focused on privacy, and we're going to have a great discussion about privacy today. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. I'm so excited to be here. I am a nerd and I love talking about privacy. I really enjoy having all of the conversations about how you do things and how you get into this area and what you need to be thinking about. I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and I think it's insanely fun, and I realize that makes me a bit of a crazy person, and I apologize in advance.
Well, you're amongst other crazy people then by
right?
that definition. So we're glad to have you. For those of you who are watching who who may be joining us fresh after the break or are just finding us due to word of mouth, first of all, welcome. Mentor Core is a community of people focused on information security, privacy, risk, compliance, ethics, governance, all of these topics that are very close together. Lisa Beth and I she and I have known each other for coming up on 25 years now. And over the course of our careers, we've mentored each other. And we came to the realization a few years ago about how close the security and privacy space are with the risk and ethics and compliance worlds. And there's some gravity toward each other, and we have common needs. This is a fields that are often insulating, often working, heads down, focused on things internally, and a lot of discussions about how our worlds work, but not as much about how we continue, grow our careers, what career paths look like, and access to mentoring and access to expertise by folks that have gone through these paths. So that's why we started Mentor Core. So we're excited to have you here. And again, today, just a great discussion about privacy. And I guess, Carrie, let's start with you and a little background on you and what it is you work on.
So I'm an attorney by training and trade. I've been in the privacy space since I graduated from law school, which is unusual. Most privacy practitioners come to privacy from something else. Right. I have been doing this from the beginning, which means that both I am very old in this space, but also that I've had an opportunity to really grow in understanding of how privacy affects different organizations differently and how privacy affects people differently, and what people are concerned about and what kinds of things they want to be worried about and that kind of thing. So I graduated from law school, and then I was the associate general counsel for a very small publicly traded organization in Texas. And I went from there to a financial services entity in Texas. And then I left there and I was the privacy counsel for Best Buy. And after I was with Best Buy for almost 5 years, and then I left them and started consulting and hooked up with the fantastic people at Contoural, whom I just desperately love, and do privacy consulting work for them. They're mostly information governance consulting, so records management, e-discovery, and privacy is a natural fit for that. When I was at Best Buy, I was actually responsible for the privacy, records management, and e-discovery groups, because all of those things are so tightly intertwined. It's very difficult to have privacy if you don't know where your stuff is, or if you aren't able to get rid of it. And you can't do e-discovery if you don't know where your stuff is, or if you didn't get rid of it properly. So privacy, records management, e-discovery are all real natural fits, I think. And so working with an information governance consulting organization was also a very natural fit. And plus, I really like those people. They're fantastic.
Well, that's half the battle.
Right?
The people are half the battle, but the topic is the other. And your comment is right on. What's the first question an auditor says? Give me your inventories.
Right.
You got to know where things
Where's your stuff?
before you can if you don't know what it is, you can't manage it.
Right. Exactly.
Very cool. Very cool. So you were a JD, so you got your JD first,
Hmm.
then you came into the privacy field.
Sort
Um,
of.
what's that?
I actually, so I am not a traditional. I didn't follow the traditional law student path. I didn't follow the pipeline, high school, college, law school. I did high school and then college a little bit, and then the Air Force, and then more college, and then working some, and then I went to law school.
Oh,
So
okay.
as part of my workforce, my work experience before I went to law school, I was working for government agencies, the United States Department of Defense, and then also I was the an administrative assistant in the student services group for my local school district. And the student services organization is responsible for dealing with students who have behavior issues, or they have individualized educational plans under the um, student Student with Disabilities Act, and all of those kinds of things. So I was dealing with confidential information about students or confidential information about the United States government. And so I was already dealing with this as part of my obligation before I ever went to law school. So when I went to law school, I thought I was going to be an environmental lawyer. And then I realized that I also like food and I want to be able to eat some of it occasionally. And environmental lawyers make no money ever.
Ah,
So,
I
right.
thought it would be you'd know
So
enough about how the food was made
no,
that you'd
no,
never eat it again.
I wanted to have enough money to be able to eat food.
Yeah.
So I was not going to be an environmental lawyer, and decided to. So my area of concentration is in administrative practice, which is statutes and regulations and all of the stuff that goes into that, which I just find I everybody has a thing that they like and enjoy, and that's the thing that I like and enjoy, which is good because other people can therefore like and enjoy things like trust and estates, which I find endlessly confusing and terrible. And so it's good that people like that, because, and then I can like statutes and regulations, so they don't have to like that thing, and I don't have to like trust and estates.
Well, we'll have to set up some time to debate some of the statutes in the privacy realm, because I love doing
Yay!
some of the analyses of it and perspectives, especially where we don't have case law to define things.
Oh, and that's probably 80% of it, is that even if you're a lawyer with a legal background in privacy and all of that, it's still 80% of it is still, I don't know, but here's what I think.
Right. And here's how we can defend our position down
Right,
the road
exactly.
if asked, and
If
that'll
I
keep us out of the ugly realm.
This is the story I can tell a judge with a straight face.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Good. Well, count on that. Look for that calendar invite, because that's something
Nice.
I enjoy a lot. Excellent. Well, you mentioned the K-12s, and this isn't something we had talked about before, but I'll add it in here. The last 12 months, as we've been going through COVID, I have a teenager. Many people have students in the K-12s, and I spent time in higher ed as a chief information security officer. And one of the things I've noticed is that there's been just a distinct lack of focus on some of the operational privacy by K-12s over the past 12 months as the rollout to COVID has happened. Reliance on technology, moves to buy things to fill needs, but without really looking at the privacy pieces of it. And I realize you're many years removed from your time in the K-12s, but is anything we can do to try and help the K-12s out as a practitioner industry, to those districts out, to help make this more of a focus beyond just what's in IEPs and just what is overtly required and not required by FERPA?
There's so much. So after I left the organization that I was the associate general counsel for, the publicly traded organization, it was actually a federal student loan guarantee agency that I went to work for in Austin. So I have almost 9 years of higher education finance experience, where we're doing a lot of the same discussion, right? Talking about how, personal information and how all of this works. So I was very closely following all of the discussions about FERPA and the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which is the law that addresses student privacy in the US. And all of the discussions about how all of this is going to work so from 2005 through when I left in 2014, which is when all schools started handing out laptops because students, to students and all those things. And how do you deal with the privacy perspectives? And I regret to say that I don't think they've fixed any of these problems. you can go back and look in the early to mid aughts and find whole bunches of cases where school districts are sued because they've done something completely insane. Like, for example, there was a school district in, I want to say it was Massachusetts, that was had handed out laptops to all of their 2,000 students in high schools, and the laptops secretly had like keystroke loggers and cameras, and the cameras were able to be remotely activated by the IT department at the school district and not tell anyone. And these kids were using these laptops for everything in things like their bedrooms, and so they had pictures and stuff stored, and just all kinds of insanity, because schools think that they own the universe of students.
Right.
And unless there's something bad happens, in which case that's the parent's fault. So the problem that we have, particularly in the K-12 space, and this is less so in higher ed, but more in the K-12 space, is that most K-12 is they're state agencies, right? They are governmental entities that have sovereign immunity. So they're not accountable for they're not legally able to be held accountable for bad things that happen.
Right.
Plus they have state budgets that they have to work under, and so they don't have money for any of the upgrades and things that we would expect. And they are absolutely not able or willing to pay for the people that would help them make better decisions. Because information security and privacy are different things.
Yeah.
Information security, I have a slide on this. One moment, please. There we go. Security is not the same as privacy. Privacy is about the collection and use of personal information, and information security is about protection of data, whatever it is, and the infrastructure. And these two things are not the same. You cannot have a security person and then declare that you have protected privacy, because those two things are different. You know what I'm talking
Whole different
about, right?
parts of the brain.
Right. Well, and different parts of the data as well. Because a privacy person, a security person, is going to look to protect whatever it is that exists in the environment, and a privacy person is going to ask why it's in the environment in the first place. What are we doing with it? What is happening there? How is this working? What do we intend? Why are we collecting this? What do we intend to do with it? And schools don't have, K-12 don't have the capability to make some of those decisions, which is how you end up with school administrators who think it's a good idea to secretly turn on cameras of their students, because in their heads, they're protecting the students. However, in reality, what they're doing is they're watching these kids undress. Right. And you end up with all of this craziness all over everywhere. So the best way I think that we could help K-12 make some of these decisions is figure out a way to make them get a privacy officer, even if it's like a state privacy officer for the State Department of Education that sets standards for the entire state. They need someone who's able to talk about privacy, not just security.
Right. It's been interesting because I've had this conversation with a number of other colleagues over the past 12 months, where we've actually volunteered our time to the district,
they don't want it,
but been rebuffed. It's really it's please let me help as I watch, as you're trying to balance out E-rate requirements for monitoring and blocking with privacy and with buying technology quickly and deploying it. I can help you with this, but there's just really no appetite.
Yes, no appetite at all whatsoever. So you move from there to Google developing platforms specifically designed for schools, where Google has had to revise because what they're selling to the school and what's actually happening on the back end aren't necessarily matching up. Or, they're making changes that are affecting the way that it works for the students, and information's being collected that they're not authorized to collect. So I'm
shocked.
Stunned and amazed, right? I know.
Today's stories about Android.
There's gambling going on in this facility.
Yeah. Today about unknown tracking happening in Android. As of today.
Yeah. So you've got this situation where schools are relying more and more on third parties to provide information or to provide information systems and technology, but they do not have the skills and abilities to do that vetting and to ask the questions. Plus also, quite frankly, Google's much bigger than any school district in the world, and they're going to be able to, they talk a good game. And actually, one of the things that Google is really good at doing is conflating privacy as security.
Mm-hmm.
So they tell you that they're privacy protective, and then they talk about all of these things they do to protect data. And they're incredibly secure. What they are not is necessarily privacy protective. Those are two different things.
Yeah. I mean, I have friends that came out of Facebook, and it's the same thing. Facebook, phenomenal security.
Oh, yeah.
But not a lick of privacy to be found.
Yep.
And that could spawn like 4 hours of talk about big.
Yeah, we don't have time. We don't have time to unpack all that.
No, exactly. But so thanks for that slight diversion into K-12. I mean, this is an area I think that those that are interested in it, please my thought is get in touch with your districts, continue to press the message and talk to legislators. It sounds like, I like your idea of legislative paths, because it does seem that nothing else, even I will give you hundreds of hours of my time.
Right. My free time, going to volunteer it.
Yeah, at no cost is making it. So you talk. So I loved your path from college to military to government, to government service, back to law school, and then into privacy. So this question comes up a lot, is the JD as it relates to being an increasing requirement for privacy roles, at least in job descriptions.
Yeah.
So you're in both,
right?
And tell me some of your perspectives on JDs and privacy, and is it required? And if it's not, how do you get there if you don't have a JD? How do you get into the realm?
So I think that it depends on how far you want to go. If you are a person who is very happy and content being an individual contributor, being a privacy analyst, being a privacy specialist, you absolutely do not need to have a JD. And anybody who writes a job description that requires a JD is losing their mind, because no JD is going to work for that money, honestly.
Right.
But it's a wonderful way to get into privacy, to take those, those ground floor roles, which I acknowledge are actually pretty few and far between right now. I suspect that is actually going to change now that companies are having to really reconsider what their technology looks like, their technology platform, what their stack looks like, because people aren't going to go back to physical. They're not going to go back to office buildings, not in the ways that they had been before. And I know that there are lots of companies who are saying, nope, everybody has to come back in the office. They're going to get a lot of pushback on that.
Yeah.
Especially the companies who said they weren't going to make people come back in. Right. So you're going to have people who have the capability to do some of that boots on the ground work in a different way. So I suspect that the number of entry level specialist and analyst jobs will probably open up. That said, if you want to be a person who is higher up in the hierarchy, right? You want to be the director of a privacy program, or the chief privacy officer. I don't know that you necessarily have to have a JD. I think the process of the things that you learn and know when you have to go through law school are very important in understanding how privacy gets put together. So I don't like it when people say, law school teaches you how to think, because I don't think that's necessarily true. However, as you spend 3 years in law school learning how laws get made and how case law works, and what the regulatory agencies have to, what kinds of powers and authority they have, and you're learning all of these things, and you begin to understand what consumer protection law looks like, and where the attorneys general have authority and where they don't, and all of these things, you start to understand the effects of this information, the effects of this environment on the laws that get made. So it's not just about being able to read the law, which anyone can do. It's about understanding how that's going to impact and affect your organization. And so for that, I think the higher up you go, the more that you have to be doing the strategic thinking for your organization, the more I think that a JD is certainly encouraged. I don't know that it's required, but I think that and if you're in healthcare, this is a different story, by the way, because healthcare has a specialization in privacy. But if you're not in healthcare, it's not required, but it maybe is going to be soon, because there's just really, in order to be able to do that strategic direction for your organization, you have to understand how all of the law stuff works.
So there has been an assertion by people having this discussion that law school, that having a JD helps you find if your business or your focus is purely in the US, but it can actually hinder you in
Yes.
a global business, because fine, you learn all about how US laws are made and how things operate, but more and more in global businesses, that's 5%, 10%, 20% of your business, whereas the rest of the world, does having a US law education help you understand the rest of the world as well? Or is it a completely different set of different set of thoughts on privacy?
It's wildly different. They're completely different. So I have spent quite a bit of time recently doing research for retention requirements in other countries, as part of some work we're doing for a client. And I had to relearn how to research statute and regulation in Canada, which is a country that speaks English, just to be able to figure out, where does this law apply? So it is absolutely true that the US has, because and this is probably way more inside baseball than we necessarily need, but the US is a common law jurisdiction, which means we have statutes and regulations, and we also have case law. The case law interprets the statutes and regulations and interprets all of this other stuff. And then also we've got, tort practice, which is personal injury and all those other things. And other jurisdictions are civil law jurisdictions, which means everything is in the statute. And so if a case changes the way a law is interpreted, that gets put into the statute. So it's all right there, which on the one hand sounds really cool. And on the other hand, if you are a person who doesn't come from that background, it's really confusing. So, I think it's true that having a US legal background is not an advantage. I don't know that it's a disadvantage, but it is not the way to get your leg up in the rest of the world. Also, the fact that the US privacy regime is really, really discounted in the rest of the world is also sort of not helpful. As a privacy practitioner, you kind of need to build your chops in global privacy before you can start rising through the ranks, because the way the US approaches privacy is so wildly different than the rest of the entire world.
And with 52 distinct laws, or 54, how we
54,
count all the
54.
properties, all the
Yep.
the territories, it's going to be as complex just in the US as it is the whole rest of the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And there's no sign of them normalizing.
No. I actually, my crystal ball tells me that it's not going to. At this point, the US, there's no way that Europe is going to declare the US to be an adequate data protection regime. Politically speaking, that would be, they would never be able to do that.
Right.
Because everything they've done is fighting against the United States and the way the United States does things. I don't know how this is going to work for GDPR, because we've lost the safe harbor and now Privacy Shield. Standard contractual clauses are now sort of on the chopping block, and we think that BCRs are also going to go that direction, which means there is going to be no legitimate means by which an entity can conduct regular transfer of data from the EU to the United States. So that's a problem. And politically speaking, because Europe, their entire law is written to make Google not be able to do Google things. I mean, it's more than that, but
that's
right?
a pretty good synopsis.
Then there's no way that the United States is going to be able to be found to be an adequate data protection regime.
Right.
Plus which, the US just has a wildly different, fundamentally different understanding of government access to data. And that's okay. The reason that Europeans are so concerned about government access to personal information makes 100% absolute sense coming out of European history, and particularly World War I and World War II.
Yeah.
They are absolutely terrified because when the government has access to personal information, terrible things happen. And so, but that's their history. That's not the US history.
Right.
And that's their sensitivity. That's not our sensitivity. Our laws do not work that way. So I don't know how we are going to reconcile the European concern over the US government having access to personal information of Europeans with the way that the US entire legal regime has grown up over the last, how old are we, 287 years or whatever that is.
Good math.
I don't know. I made that number up. I have no idea.
I just know it's over 250.
Right. It's two something.
I guess it's coming up on 300 soon. So 285, 290, something.
I don't know.
Math is hard. I went into
math
technology
is hard. Math
not
is
to have to do
terrible.
with math.
I don't like math.
Well, I think, and I think your point is made. This isn't a zero-sum game where one is good and one is bad. It's all about the constituencies that you serve. And I think that the idea of how you normalize that, we can't even normalize it within the US,
right?
Let alone across two very different, in the US, there is the stacking order of government and business and person, and those are fairly well defined and consistent across all 50 states and and territories. But now you start to bring this out to the world, and that stacking order does not line up elsewhere, and that will be a huge stumbling block. And then you layer on, just like you said, the some of the scorn for how certain companies in certain business areas have risen to the perceived detriment of local talent and local businesses. Response, we just saw new tariffs that have been announced in response to some of the response. So it doesn't seem to be heading toward any kind of détente,
right?
But it's going to take some creative thinking in order to come up with that crosswalk.
Yep. Or we're going to see a lot of data localization, which is honestly, it's bad. That's not a good way to go about things. I'm not necessarily a fan of the theory that data wants to be free. I don't think that's true, and I think that's damaging. Yeah. But data does need to flow, and if data can't flow, then it gets stagnant, and we end up with a worse situation than if we were able to move things around and clean it up.
Well, what you just said reflects, back to the discussion we had before we went on the air, but was the idea that misinterpretations of laws or misunderstanding of what laws are meant to do. Privacy laws are not meant to restrict data. They're meant to put meaningful controls and empowerment over how data is used and moved, and give people understanding of that. So we also have just common misdefinitions or misunderstandings of what it is that's trying to be achieved on both sides, and people using these as weapons.
Yeah, they're giant mallets.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is privacy is the ability of a person to make decisions about who gets to know what about them. It's not anything more or less than that. It's not, privacy isn't restriction. Privacy is, I get to decide if you know my birthday. I get to decide if you know my favorite color. And I get to decide if you know literally everything I've ever done on the internet in my entire life. Those are decisions that I get to make. And when I don't get to make them, I feel personal, my sphere of comfort is smaller, and that's not okay. I was listening to the presentation that you had a month and a half ago, where the speaker was talking about how, what people decide to do and what people say they want and what people decide to do are different. They say they want privacy, and yet they do things that are not privacy protective. And yeah, that's part of it, but it's also the case that in many of these instances, there isn't a different option. I can't buy a TV that connects to the internet and not also have a TV so that I can watch, I don't know, so I can stream from my laptop rather than having to physically connect it. So I can't buy a TV that will do that, but won't track my viewing history.
Right.
So I have to buy a dumb TV and then hook it up to my laptop in order to be able to stream from my laptop. I can't, not everything needs to be connected to the internet, but good luck trying to find a refrigerator that doesn't have Wi-Fi. Why? These things don't necessarily, in some cases, the choice does not exist to make a more privacy protective choice. So I think it's a little disingenuous to say people aren't making these decisions, because in some cases the choice just isn't there. There isn't a choice. Right. You can make a more privacy protective decision by picking, a refrigerator that is less connected to Wi-Fi, but you can't make a decision. It's very difficult to make a decision that doesn't do that. The same for home security systems. Why does my home security system need to be Wi-Fi enabled? That's just another area. That's just another attack vector. Like, why do I need that?
That one is ease of implementation. This is
I know
ease versus
right. Exactly. Yeah. It is. It's much easier to just to staple it to the wall rather than actually have to go to the process of wiring it all up so that it works. Right. Totally get that, but it's another attack vector.
Oh, completely.
So, right. So that's a problem. We actually have a question. Question is that due to companies not understanding what privacy means? As you said, many are confused about the definition of privacy. Yes, 100%. Maybe if they better understand privacy, they can make better choices when they build products. True. However, yes, that is part of it is people mistake privacy and security. The other part of it is monetization of data. And the ability the more information that you have about a customer, the more information you have about a customer, and you're able to sell them different things, honestly. There are, for many, many years now, the, capitalist regime in the US has been very focused on what they call personalization. And in the corporate sphere, personalization means the more information I know about you, the better I can target things that I want you to buy from me. When you talk to consumers about personalization, what they want is not for you to be able to sell me better things. What they want is for you to be able to tell me better information about the stuff I've already bought. How do I make this work better for me? How do I make this work better for my family? How do can you give me a list of everything I've purchased from you in the last 15 months, because I bought this thing and it was super cool and now I don't remember what it was, and I need to replace it, or I want to buy a second one for my sister. That's what consumers think of when they think of personalization, is make the experience more personal to me. And retailers and and capitalism thinks of personalization as a way to learn more information and sell more stuff. So companies are building these things without these privacy protections in them because they want the data. They think they need the data in order to be able to do this personalization that isn't really what consumers want. And so they need this data, and they need things that collect this data. The Wi-Fi enabled refrigerator is Wi-Fi enabled partly so that it can, so that as a service to you, but more so that LG and Samsung can understand what you're putting in your refrigerator and how frequently you buy and what else they can do to make you buy more stuff.
Right. And prompt you to get on automatic subscription. Mm-hmm. So the milk always arrives. There's more spending. You may not need it. You may not want it, but it shows up. The same reason applications are going to subscription, forgetting that you have them, and there's a greater predictable revenue share. And there's actually, I posted in the chat some research on the effectiveness of personalization is only marginally more effective, 4% in some research, than non-personalized. And it's and I think this is why Facebook and Apple are at loggerheads right now, as Apple, I think this week or next week, will put on new tracking controls into iOS. And Facebook's whole model has been built around the value that comes from personalized ads. But when you take that ability away, the realization may be that personalized ads and that which Facebook purports to give isn't all that valuable. So we'll see how that ends up coming out.
It's really difficult to, so within the marketing and ad space, the big push is for attribution. How do I know that the money that I spent on this marketing effort turned around and turned into revenue for me?
Right.
And it's really difficult to attribute spend by consumers with marketing on third-party platforms like Facebook and Google. That attribution is very difficult. It's made more difficult by people like me who deliberately do not click the links and go to a different browser and open up that thing that I found, so that I am not nice, awesome, so that I'm not giving them any more revenue than they absolutely need. Yeah, so they hate me, and I get that, and that's fine. But the other thing is that the more that you try to learn about a consumer as they are right now, the less you understand about what they're going to need 2 years in the future. And also, you run into problems with the amount of information that you get about somebody starts to reveal things that are considered sensitive, whether it's sensitive under the California Consumer Privacy Act, or it's sensitive under GDPR, or Brazil's new law, the LGPD, or whatever it is. The more you learn about someone, the more you're going to know in things about them that are private: their sexual orientation, their religious affiliation, whether or not they're members of works councils or unions, whether or not they are, suffering from some sort of disease, their health experience, their health situation, things like how much money they make, how much, whether or not they're in, massive amount of debt, what their race is, or their gender concept, or and all of these things where we consider those to be private when we're talking to a person. So as I've met you, Dan, I haven't said, okay, well, Dan, here are all of the 87 characteristics about you that I already know because I've done all of this research, and so I know all of these, because that's not what happens. As we are developing a relationship, which is what all of these organizations say they want relationships with their customers. As we're developing that relationship, the more you get comfortable with me, the more you're going to share. And the less you're comfortable with me, the less you're going to share. It is not acceptable for me to come at you and say, I need you to fill out this questionnaire because I need to understand all of these things about you before we can talk. That's not how this works. So having that level of knowledge and information is actually, and the New York Times used this word, the New York Times used the word creepy. I think it was like 147 times in articles in 2009. I did a presentation more than a decade ago, obviously, and that was one of the things that I talked about, was that even the New York Times couldn't come up with a better word than creepy.
Mm-hmm. Well, have you? So, I talk in my talks about the documentary, The Creepy Line. Have you seen it?
I haven't.
It's a great documentary, and the whole idea of Eric Schmidt's creepy line of we'll do things that go up to the point in which make you go, but the problem is that line keeps moving.
Yeah. Well, and their perspective on where the line is keeps moving also. Because I think we get entities that do this work get so comfortable with this being the work that to them it's just natural. Wow. And so they push the envelope a little bit. They move the line a little bit more. What they don't realize is that the consumer world has not followed them into the first place. And so moving to the second place is even worse. Right. And so that's how you end up with Google's gigantic mission creep, from don't be evil to we want to own the world. And that becomes part of the issue, is that the touch point with the consumer doesn't exist, in part because that's not actually the goal. The goal is not the consumer.
Right. Absolutely. And one of the things I can't figure out is, you set this up beautifully. The idea of you have all this information, and now you've now wandered into the, Here Be Dragons territory, where you actually have increased your own liability by having so much information about people. You actually have to actively prove or disprove that you weren't discriminatory in following ways, because you had the chance to know about it and make decisions on it. Yep. I think we saw it in Facebook ad targeting in housing is one example.
Yep.
But it's across the board. I would have thought that the risk mindset in companies, which is often very risk averse, barring the big techs, would be would have figured out that having this much information is causing them, risk beyond their own, maybe into their own creepy line.
Yeah. So the issue there is that the people who are making the really detailed tactical decisions are not the people who are doing the strategic risk management of the company. And this isn't a bad thing, right? I'm not saying that this is terrible and that's not the way this should work. But what you have is, especially in large organizations, Google, Facebook, Target, Best Buy, whatever, what you have are people who are at that specialist analyst level who are making decisions about what information is going to be part of, so you have an organization that decides they're going to subscribe to a data broker. And so they're going to do a data match with this data broker. And at first blush, it actually doesn't sound all that bad. But the people who are making the decisions about what data is being collected from the data broker are not the people who are making the strategic decisions about engaging the data broker in the first place. Right. So you have people who are newer out of college, who are in marketing, they're not in privacy, right? Who are in data analytics, they're not in privacy, who are making decisions.
Incentivized to grow things. Not
absolutely.
To protect,
well, and if you're data analytics, your absolute belief in the entire world is more data is better, right? It doesn't matter what the data is, more data is better. So you have these concepts and these ideas that are floating around, and everybody says, wouldn't that be cool? And there isn't anybody in the conversation who has both the background knowledge to be able to say, hey gang, if we start advertising some of this stuff based on somebody's race, that's discriminatory and that's illegal in all 50 states. You don't have somebody who's got that background who also is in those individual meetings where people are saying, we're going to start collecting these 1,300 pieces of information. So that's actually one of the places where having a JD is incredibly helpful, because as a JD, you have that broader perspective about the way other laws work and the other laws that exist in the US, where you can come up to someone and say, hey, all 50 racial discrimination. And if we start using this information that has race in it, not only is this bad, but we're going to have to prove that we didn't factor this into any of our decision making, as opposed to them making us prove that we did. So maybe don't collect it in the first place, right? Like that's where the JD is helpful, because you've got that broader perspective about things like the 7 elements of an effective compliance program under the DOJ's sentencing guidelines, and all of this stuff that you pull in from other places that isn't specifically about privacy, because the training, you can't train someone in all of this stuff, because you just end up sending them to law school, right? So I mean, they might as well just go to law school. It's much more expensive, but so having a JD is really helpful in that way, because then you can start to think about not just the strategic pieces of it, but also the tactical pieces of it and what this looks like on the ground, and can start creating the processes and the standards and all of those things that address the fact that we're not going to include race in any information that we collect, because we don't want, if we don't have it, we cannot have been discriminatory based on race, which isn't also not entirely true. So that's not legal advice. But that, that's at
with
least
the JD, you have to make that disclaimer.
Yeah. None of this information is legal advice. I am not your lawyer. Okay. So there's all of that. There's all of these pieces where having the ability to have that broader thought comes with experience, and it comes with having a broader background than just being in privacy necessarily gives you. It doesn't mean you have to have a JD, but I think the more you move up in the privacy hierarchy, I think the more likely it becomes that it's if not a necessity, it's a really good idea.
Yeah, and it's a growth and retention path for people in the field too, that are interested in it, that haven't. Organizations can use that as I don't know, are people still paying for degrees these days? But
yeah, sort of. I don't know if anybody's going to pay you to go to law school, but
I mean, it used to be. You used to be able to go and get your MBAs paid for, and you used to go and get your law school, but those are very different days. But I think it's not a bad path to think about. I mean, I'm not a JD. I've not done law school. I've had meaningful relationships with every one of my general counsels that I've worked with, because I think that's, for us, had been the best way forward on building privacy programs and building security programs, which are increasingly tied to compliance as well,
right?
And regulations. But
I would actually add to that and just put in a plug. When I am talking to people about building privacy programs, I regularly tell them that their best friend needs to be their CISO. And I call this the farmer and the cowman should be friends.
Oh, yes.
And for any of you who've ever seen the musical Oklahoma, that reference will make sense to you. And for those of you who haven't seen that musical, I think the title probably speaks for itself. But totally disparate functions, but these two functions need to be absolutely tightly tied together. If the privacy function and the information security function are not best friends, then your data protection scheme is going to have holes in it. Full stop.
Yeah. I
nice.
I totally agree. Yeah. I'm a big fan of that. Although I have not, now you've made me realize I need to make mine more 2020 and get the gender out of it.
That's a very
really
1950s.
The farmer and the cowboy. You actually threw me for a loop when you said it. I'm like, wait, that's not right. But it is right, as it should be now. But yeah, the farmer and the person that herds the cattle.
The cattle herder.
They must be friends.
Yes.
And like I said, my best relationships have been with the attorneys, with the privacy officers, with the security officers, and actually that generated one of the ways to manage this. What we, coming out of higher ed, the idea of an IRB, data use is human subject research.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's no different than human subject research. So treat it like that. Look at the ethics of it. Look at the compliance of it. Look at the business value of it. Look at the value to the person whose data it is. And that's
all
been
of
a really
that,
effective way.
Yeah, all of that is a privacy. That's just a privacy impact assessment or a data protection impact assessment if you're in the EU. That's what that does. A privacy impact assessment is intended to ask those exact questions. Yeah. What data? What's the impact? Whose data is it? What's happening here? What are we doing with this? Where's it getting stored, and how are we getting rid of it? A data protection impact assessment in the EU is just, high risk of impact to rights and freedoms, and then you start asking those questions. So it very much is like looking at an institutional review board inquiry. How are you treating your human subject? What are you doing? And it's the same kind of thing. And if people could get past the concern about what it's called, privacy impact assessment sounds very threatening. I think that probably they'd be able to see that it's really just, justify what you're doing.
Yeah. Wait, you mean I have to get rid of data?
What?
No.
I know. That's the next hill to die on is you have to delete it at some point.
Yeah. But I might need it down the road.
Yeah.
Everyone's a hoarder when it comes to data.
You don't need to know that I bought a CRT television 15 years ago. This does not tell you anything about me now.
But the correlation of people who bought CRTs 15 years ago
and
also went to McDonald's on Tuesday, the 15th of March, and that will indicate that you will want to buy a new, bigger LCD next week.
Right. Unlikely, but sure.
So we have about 10 minutes left. And one question I want to put in here, and this is just a very current topic, and it is not, we will not get into the politics of it, but I want to talk a little bit about COVID passports.
Oh, goodness.
So COVID passports, for those of you that don't know, are the idea of being able to prove that you have had certain vaccines, certain controls around your health, and specifically for COVID. And there are political componentries to this, but it really is there's an increasing discussion about privacy and how it relates to COVID passports. So Carrie, can you give us a brief discussion on some of the challenges and the risks of this, and then the benefits and the pros and cons?
So this is hysterical because my daughter she's 20, almost 5. And she was at work the other day and she texted me and said, somebody here wants to know what your opinion is on COVID passports. And I was like, oh, we don't have time for that?
Yeah,
really?
I purposely kept this to 5 minutes.
Texting? So Yeah. So here's my sort of opinion on COVID passports. I think that there are places where that's going to make some sense. For example, personal example, right now, the U.S. is requiring anyone who comes into the U.S. from overseas to prove that they have had a negative COVID test within 72 hours before they enter the U.S. Okay, cool. My sister is getting married in September. She's getting married in Mexico. I'm going to go to Mexico to go to my sister's wedding. I'm going to be there for 4 days. At day 2, I have to go get a COVID test that says that I do not have COVID. I will be fully vaccinated by then, as will the vast majority of the adult population of the United States. Why wouldn't it make sense for me to also have something that says in my regular passport, which I also have to show to get back into the US, that already says, and I've been fully vaccinated, please let me come home again. Mm-hmm. So I think that in that situation where there's a material difference to it's going to make a major difference to a requirement, and also I'm going to be out of the country for some period of time or traveling or whatever. I think that makes sense. Or at least
the IATA is creating their own whole data collection mechanism with the airlines in order to collect this outside of an existing process. And I think this is where people start to get squirrely about data sprawl. Well,
and so, and the airlines are, I mean, that's another great example, because we've seen with the airlines that their data collection, they blame a lot of it on the FAA, but the FAA doesn't require all of the data collection that the airlines mandate.
Oh, yeah.
So, right. So, but they say we have to get this because FAA regs require that we get this. Well, that's not true. But nobody's going to push back, because if you push back, you're not going to be allowed to fly, and that's bad.
Right.
Although for the last year, nobody's been going anywhere. So I think the data collection and the entire process between, what gets collected and how, I think when you travel, okay, cool. But things like requiring COVID passports to go to the coffee shop, I don't like that. Like, just refuse me service if I'm not wearing a mask, because I'm not going to be there for days. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be there for hopefully 20 minutes. And if I can't wear a mask in that time, then that's a different issue. So right. I think it depends on what the COVID passport's intended to be used for. I don't understand, I think a lot of the objection to COVID passports there's the sincere objection or concern, really. It's like, we don't understand what's happening. We want more visibility and transparency into the data collection and the data use and what you're going to do with it. And is this now forming part of my, perpetual file somewhere in the bowels of the United States government? So the legitimate questions, mm-hmm. and then there's the political posturing on both sides. I want to be super clear about that, right? Like, it's everybody. It's not limited to one particular party or one particular group of people. It's everyone going nuts all the time. I think that's a different question. The political posturing is not helpful, because what it does is it impacts the ability to talk about the legitimate concerns.
Right.
And that and that you could take that statement and paper it across absolutely everything that has happened in the last 2 years.
In 20, 30 years.
Right. Well, yeah.
Yeah. I just, my part of my job and my thinking process is to take things to their farthest end. And I just can't help but think about, the idea of, America is very good at segregating. And so you have the vaccine passport elevators.
Right.
And they didn't have it elevators, which can only transport one person. Yes, there's health to that.
Right.
The question is, to what end? Or collecting this data about me. Now, what do you know about me politically, socioeconomically?
Exactly.
And using it for other things. I think if I could trust businesses and to only use it for certain things, I think that would be a lot easier discussion. And this doesn't just go for COVID passports. This goes for just about everything.
Right. Well, and so then you continue down that path some more. So if I'm a person who is in a socioeconomically disadvantaged area, and so getting a COVID shot is very difficult for me in the first place, maybe because I don't have transportation, or because we're in a healthcare desert, or whatever the deal is, so I can't get the shot in the first place. which means in addition to not being able to get the shot, I obviously can't get the second shot, so I can't get the passport. So now I am being called out as someone who is not doing their civic duty by getting these shots. And while I absolutely believe that it is every adult's responsibility, and hopefully we'll be able to get these to kids too, to get the shot if they're able, in some cases it's just not possible.
Right. Well, there's health reasons you can't.
There's health reasons, right? Whatever. That's why we want to get to herd immunity, is so that those people who physically can't get them for whatever reason are still protected by the 85% of us that did.
Right.
So, exactly. Right. So cool. But you have to account for the people who cannot get the shot for whatever reason, whether it's medical or they're unable to get there because of transportation, or, we're still having issues with people who are being contacted within, a couple of hours that they need to come get their shot, or they finally made the list. And there are people who do not have the capability to take work off with that kind of notice. And we have to be respectful and acknowledge that and understand that is going to disproportionately affect non-white collar, non-knowledge workers. Yeah. And so how are you going to fix that and not be discriminatory?
Exactly. And I think that is, and therein lies the biggest piece of this whole discussion. With data comes power. Right. With power comes responsibility. Yes. And this is not,
I'm sure a superhero said that
somehow. I'm sure I just violated many.
Yeah. Marvel's actually on the phone right now calling you.
Oh, so. Good. Because, I want to fight against Disney. No. It was said as fair use. How about that?
There you go.
So we come to so thank you for that. Indulging me in that part of the discussion. I think it's easy to shy away from them because there's political boundaries in it. But I think it's important that we as practitioners, continue to drive the discussion, because it really is. These are the things that need to be talked about when saying, well, do we need to create this new app that collects this thing? Do we need to collect this? Why do we need to? What are we doing with it? How do we make sure we don't use other things for it? And how do we get rid of it when we don't need it anymore? It's all part of the same discussion. So thank you for that. And we're getting close to the end of the hour. Just thank you again for what a wonderful, wonderful discussion.
This has been so much fun.
Likewise.
I hope this is helpful for other people.
I have one more question for you. And we, as Mentor Core is focused around mentoring, as focused on trying to help people grow in their careers and take things that they learn from others around them. The question we ask all of our guests is to tell me some of the best advice you've ever gotten from a mentor.
So one of my favorite people in the universe was the Chief Information Security Officer for an organization that I worked for. She was, I want to be her when I grow up. It's not going to happen because she's amazing and I'm not anything like as amazing as she is. But she was absolutely incredible at developing teams and developing her team specifically to be able to function without her. And so when she retired, she left a fully functioning, fully developed team because that's what she felt like her job was to be able to have the team run without her. And at one point, they actually had to demonstrate that they could while she was still there. And she was so proud that they were able to do that. It's amazing. So I took that information, and I had always thought, as I was doing my own team building for my teams, that's important. My job as your boss is to make it so that you can do something else if that's what you want. I want to make sure that you have all of the skills that you are able to decide where you want to work or if you want to work. So I encouraged that in all of my teams. But the best advice that she ever gave me was when she retired, she gave me a gift and said to me, with this gift, think about when you're going to be the rock and think about when you need to be the stream. By which she meant, right? I know, she was so good. She was so brilliant. In some cases, you really do. You need to stand your ground. You have to stand there and say, I understand what you're saying. I hear you, but you cannot sell customer information on the internet. and I cannot allow you to do this. Let us find some other way to accomplish your goals. And in some cases, you need to be the stream. You need to be willing to go with the flow and figure out how to help while in midstream. When are you going to be the rock, and when are you going to be the stream? And that is I think that's really, really important. All compliance professionals, because there are situations where as a compliance professional, and it doesn't matter what compliance function you're in, you have to stand up and say, I hear you, but we cannot do that thing. We have to find a different way to get you what you need, because that way is not allowed. And
that's
so,
especially poignant coming from a chief
right?
information security officer who, the origin story of CISOs is block, defend, or of security professionals is
Right.
block, defend, and avoid, not, and it hasn't been enable. And that's that's really insightful. Yep. And the fact that she was able to create an organization that was able to function without her, and but was also comfortable not worrying that creating redundancy and support also left them personally vulnerable,
right,
is a huge feat.
She left a really good team.
That's amazing. Well, Carrie, you left us with a really great episode of Mentor Core today, and I am so thankful for you being here. We will be back in 1 week with another great guest. But thank you so much for being here, Carrie. And if you're interested in seeing other episodes, you can go to mentorcore.biz to see all of our previous webinars. And if you're interested in joining, you can go to mentorcore.biz/about. We'd love to have you, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next Mentor Core webinar.